Hello there, I'm a day late reviewing 1987's. For most of those watching, this is how they think of Steve Martin.
We're gonna go down there and look around for clues.
Do you want to come?
Right now, the only thing that matters is that there's a killer on the loose in our building.
For those of us old enough to remember, this is how Martin actually became famous. Roxanne lies somewhere in between. Roxanne is Martin's take on the play Cyrano de Bergerac by Edmond Rostand. He had seen the 1950 movie adaptation and was one of his favorite films. Typical of Hollywood, Roxanne is not a faithful adaptation, but rather a modern take on the material. Truthfully, I'm often disappointed by the reimaginings of artistes. Classics are a classic for a reason. But as it so happens, I haven't read Cyrano, and the movie isn't called Cyrano. It's called Roxanne. So with its title, it lets you know that it's going to be a bit different from the source material. So I give Martin a fair amount of leeway for that consideration. As it happens, I'm glad I did, because this is one of my favorite movies by Martin. The movie opens with the introduction of our protagonist, and it's not Roxanne. It is one C.D. Bales, and his opening scene tells us three things about him. 1, he has an abnormally large nose. 2, he doesn't take any guff over it. And 3, that he is a physically capable individual. And that will come into play shortly when he meets the woman the movie is named after. Speaking of which, meet Roxanne. She's about to learn the hard way that cats have a mind of their own. And while she's trying to get her cat to come into the house, she accidentally locks herself out. Worse yet, for her anyways, her robe is caught in the door and she isn't wearing anything underneath her robe.
Oh yeah.
She somehow makes it unseen to the local fire station where we find out that CD is the fire chief. She explains her situation, he gets some tools, and they head back to her house. He manages to get into the house, and while Roxanne retrieves a robe, he makes them a quick snack and introduces himself. We find out that Roxanne is only here for the summer, and that she is a grad student studying astronomy. As they talk, CD stares at her, lost in her beauty. CD realizes that he's probably overstayed his welcome, and he says goodnight. Cut to the next day, where we are introduced to Chris. He is a professional firefighter that is going to help CD whip his volunteer fire department into shape. One of the volunteer firefighters by the name of Chuck decides to show Chris around town a bit. They make it to the local watering hole, and here we see Roxanne talking with CD's friend Dixie. It also turns out that Dixie is Roxanne's landlord, and she owns the house that Roxanne is staying at for the summer. Now that we've met all our main characters, the plot is about to be set in motion. What we have in store is a romantic triangle. Chris is young and ruggedly handsome, and Roxanne is certainly giving him the come-hither look. He just has one flaw. Turns out he is painfully bashful around hot women, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. The next day, CD is helping Roxanne move her telescope to a more advantageous spot, and CD asks her about the project that she is working on. She admits that she may have discovered a comet. Thanks to a mathematical irregularity she uncovered, she believes that there might be an undiscovered comet that will come into view during the summer that can be seen from a large telescope array in Arizona by her uncle. CD is very happy for her and he wishes her the best of luck in the search. Later that day, Roxanne, Dixie, and Sandy are at a restaurant when Chris shows up, and it isn't long before they show how much higher on the evolutionary ladder they are than men.
Oh, Steve, don't look now, but the Viking just came in. Don't look.
Oh, God, it's him.
Well, maybe not so much. Sandy and Dixie egg Roxanne on until she says that she will ask him out. However, while Chris is in the bathroom, he has an accident with the sink and ends up climbing out the bathroom window rather than looking like he soiled himself.
No way.
A few days later, CD, Dixie, and Roxanne are all having dinner together at a restaurant/bar when some guy walks up and tries to start a fight with CD. CD tries to be the bigger man and walks away, at least up until the point where the man calls him Big Nose. CD insults the man, saying that Big Nose isn't much of an insult and that he himself could come up with whatever number the man can get on a dartboard better. As it turns out, the man is good at darts and CD has to come up with 20 better insults. He does so, and it is quite funny. CD then tries to leave, but the man has been shown up in front of all these people and tries to make it physical, and CD handles that rather efficiently as well. He then leaves, and everyone, including Roxanne, is very impressed.
It's all in the reflexes.
The next day, Roxanne is at the local bookstore when she sees Chris come in to get a copy of Sartre's Being and Nothingness. Looks and Brains. Yum. Only it turns out to be for another fireman who had bought it but was too embarrassed to pick it up himself. In classic comedy of errors fashion, Roxanne misses that part. Meanwhile, CD and Dixie are having lunch, and Dixie finds out that CD likes Roxanne. She asks him why he doesn't ask Roxanne out. CD admits that he would like to, but he's all too aware of how large his nose is, and that it isn't attractive at all. Dixie is trying to be encouraging when Sandy comes in and tells CD how impressed she and everyone else was with him last night, and then tells Dixie that she thinks that Roxanne is in love. CD conflates the two items and thinks that Roxanne loves him. CD heads back to the firehouse and finally meets Chris, and we get a montage piece of he and CD training the volunteers. A few days later, CD and Roxanne go for a hike, and Roxanne tells him that she has met someone that she is interested in and needs CD's help. CD thinks that she is talking about him, but Roxanne says that it is Chris. Roxanne then asks CD to encourage Chris to ask her out, and he agrees. Cut to a bit later, and we find out why CD hasn't had plastic surgery.
Cut it. Kid, allergies to anesthetics are very, very dangerous. You know that. You've been in comas before.
All said and done, this is probably for the best. Even more later, CD meets with Chris and tells him that Roxanne is attracted to him. At first, Chris is excited, but then has second thoughts because he admits to CD he is nervous around attractive women and he doesn't know how to talk to them. Sarcastically, CD tells Chris to write her a letter. Some time goes by and Chris tells CD that he is going to take his advice and write Roxanne a letter.
Missed it by that much.
And even more later, Roxanne asks CD what's the story with Chris, and CD explains that Chris is going to be writing her a letter. We then cut to even later, and we see that Chris has come by CD's place to see what CD thinks about his letter.
Dear Roxanne, how's it going? Want to have a drink sometime? If you do, check this box.
Needless to say, CD is not impressed and explains that Roxanne is special, that she needs to be wooed. Chris admits that he doesn't have the vocabulary to impress Roxanne and asks CD to write the letter for him. He says that CD has the vocabulary to put what he, Chris, feels onto paper. CD reluctantly agrees, but takes it as an interesting challenge. Can he seduce her on paper? More time goes by, and one night while showing off some astronomical sights through her telescope to Dixie and CD, Roxanne admits that she received a letter from Chris and that she loved it.
I'm melting.
Excellent!
She then asks CD to pass on that she would like to go out with Chris.
Bogus.
CD tells Chris, who is once again excited, but that quickly changes to an anxiety attack. He begs CD for help, and once again CD agrees. Cut to that night. Chris shows up at Roxanne's house, and he is wearing a hat despite it being a warm night. This is because he's been wired for sound, and CD is listening in and will tell Chris what to say. Things go well for a while, but Chris has a Joe Biden moment.
Because of the actions we've taken, things have begun to change. End of quote. In the past 3 weeks.
And repeats an emergency call that comes in over their frequency. He loses contact with CD and has to improvise on his own, and it doesn't go well.
Pillows. Can I fluff your pillows? Maybe?
I have to go in now.
Wait.
Chris begs CD to try again, and this time CD disguises himself as Chris, and he speaks directly to her. CD pours out his heart, and Roxanne is won over by his words, and Chris heads into the house only for CD to realize.
Oh, God, I did it. Oh, shit, I did it.
On the plus side, it wasn't all roses for Chris either.
I couldn't do it the third time.
Later, Roxanne gets the news. They discover the comet, and she wanted to share the news with CD. She also lets him know that she's going to be out of town for about a week, following up on that. Since Chris isn't at the fire station, she asks CD to let Chris know that she will be gone for the week, and would he please write her. CD says okay, and Roxanne leaves. During the following week, CD pours his heart out into multiple letters. One night he is at Dixie's restaurant talking with her when she calls him out, saying that he should tell Roxanne that he loves her. He admits that he kinda already has when Chuck comes in saying that he is covering for Chris, who went to pick up Roxanne. It turns out that she is back early because the letters moved her so. CD rushes out to let Chris know that he has been writing Roxanne letters during the past week and not to be surprised if she brings it up. He then leaves, and unfortunately for Chris, all Roxanne wants to do is go on about the letters and how they made her feel. Chris can't handle all the pressure and he bolts. Shortly thereafter, Dixie drops off a partially written letter at Roxanne's that CD had left behind at her cafe. Roxanne then calls CD and asks him to come over. She confronts him about the letters. At first he denies it, but then he fesses up. Roxanne is mad that CD seduced her for Chris, and CD is mad that she slept with Chris and not himself, and they part in anger. Later that night, she shows up at his house while he's thinking on the roof. She says that she has done some thinking of her own, and she realizes that she loves the man that wrote the letters to her, that she wants to be with that man. And if it's CD and not Chris, that's okay with her. He comes down off the roof and the two kiss. They then go into the house to further explore their newfound love. The end. And there you have it, Roxanne. I loved this movie when I first saw it as a teenager back in the 80s. I still enjoy it as an adult, but now see it in a different light. There are some questions I have about the dubious moral decisions made, and I will credit Martin a bit, as he does try to bring up some of those questions in the argument towards the end of the movie. But before really delving deep into those questions, he separates our two protagonists, and then has Roxanne sweep it all away with an I love you. In the realm of rom-coms, this is definitely more comedy than romance. Understandable, as Martin had already tried to break out of his comedian persona with the movie Pennies from Heaven, and that bombed horribly. So it was back to comedy for him. But he made sure that he had some heart. Be warned, there are a number of gags that aren't material to the plot and are quite absurd. These may have you scratching your head, but I have to admit, I found most of those very funny, but they aren't for everyone. As a comedy overall, I think the movie works quite well and is filled with plenty of laughs. As a romance, I think it could have spent a little more time building the chemistry between CD and Roxanne, and less time on the B-plot of training the firefighting crew. As it is, a lot of CD's attraction seems to be him being lost in her beauty. Which is funny, as later in the movie when they fight, CD accuses Roxanne of wanting Chris because he looked good. The standout scene for building chemistry is when CD pretends to be Chris and he hides beneath the trees and tells her how he feels. But admittedly, there's little build up to that point that would explain why he feels the way he does towards her. As a teenager, this sort of character development wasn't something that I missed. But as an adult, I certainly feel it is lacking. But as I said earlier, this is more of a comedy than a romance, and Martin's script is about getting laughs and not about building the bond between CD and Roxanne. The movie was directed by Fred Schepisi, best known for Roxanne, A Cry in the Dark, 6 Degrees of Separation, and Empire Falls. It was written by Steve Martin based on the play by Edmund Rostand. Martin is best known for The Jerk, Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, Roxanne, and LA Story. It starred Steve Martin, Daryl Hannah, Rick Rossovich, and Shelley Duvall. All do a fine job for a comedy. It was rated PG for some adult language and sexual innuendo. It has a runtime of 1 hour and 47 minutes. I found it mostly an engaging watch, and it held my attention. It had a budget of $12 million, and it made $39 million, so it made money. IMDb has it at 6.6 out of 10, Metacritic has it at 73 out of 100, and Rotten Tomatoes has it at 88% per critics and 63% per audience scores. This is a case where I would agree with the critics, and I would give it a solid 7.5 out of 10. It's a well-meaning comedy with a little romance thrown in, and should bring a smile to your face. So if you're looking for a lighthearted comedy, I say check it out. As always, thanks for watching. Until next time.
It's one small step for man.
Now cut that!